The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
With everyone's eyes in Europe fixed on the new government that just was recently elected in France, at the Trumpet, as you might expect, we've been focusing our readers' attention on Germany because that really is the key to the future in Europe. And just the other day, this was sent to us from GermanForeignPolicy.com, a website many of us here at the Trumpet do follow frequently. And it says this: German foreign policy experts are discussing what form German leadership in Europe and the world should take. Germany has a duty to take the lead, according to the latest edition of the most influential German foreign policy journal, International Politik. It says several well-known experts are presenting their proposals on the role German hegemony should play. A little later it says, for the first time with its current edition, International Politik is launching a larger public debate on Berlin's hegemonic policy. Even though this policy is already being applied today, until recently, it was officially denied to avoid humiliating other EU countries. And so they're becoming, as you've read, more vocal. They're coming forward now, and of course the re-election or the failed re-election bid of Nicolas Sarkozy in France is only going to bring Germany to the fore that much more obviously. This report from GermanForeignPolicy.com comes right on the heels of what we've also spotlighted recently from May 4th, the article in UK's Daily Express about new leadership in Europe and what leaders in Europe, bureaucrats, are talking about without Britain. They're helping to support the Union. It says in the Daily Express, and I think this has been read to you before, senior bureaucrats are secretly plotting to create a super powerful EU president to realize their dream of abolishing Britain, we can reveal. That's from the Daily Express, May 4th. And of course, Mr. Fraser's been writing about this quite often, and you've read a lot in the Trumpet too, about Britain being booted out of this union. It says later on in the article, tellingly, the UK has been excluded from the confidential discussions within the shady Berlin group of Europhile politicians, spearheaded by German Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle. So who would have thought, right, that Germany would be spearheading this movement? To get one leader, one super powerful leader, and to get rid of some of the other offices of those bureaucrats, so that there's one man that has real authority who can lead Europe. And it's interesting, the ones that are left out of these discussions, as I said, Britain, and the ones who are spearheading the discussions, as I say, Germany. It says opponents, notice this, opponents fear the plan could create a modern-day equivalent of the European emperor envisaged by Napoleon Bonaparte, or a return to the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne that dominated Europe in the Dark Ages. And that's something that you could have taken right out of the Trumpet. Not just out of the Trumpet, right out of the Plain Truth, decades ago. I'll read a few quotes to you from the Plain Truth in just a moment. But this is something that the Plain Truth and the Trumpet now have been talking about for decades, for over a half century, in fact. The rise of a strongman in Europe. This is from Brad McDonald's column from last week, May 3rd. This was before the elections happened there in France. And he's talking about what could possibly happen with all these developments, not just in France, but all these other things that are happening in Europe as well. He writes, it's possible, likely even, that the convergence of these events, the widespread resistance to German-imposed austerity, the renaissance of nationalism, Spain's imminent default, the collapse of the Dutch government, and the inconveniently timed national elections in Greece and France. He says it's possible, even likely, that this will produce a moment of historic importance. As this unfolds, don't take your eyes off the nation at the center of it all. Don't take your eyes off the nation at the center of it, at the nation that's literally in the center of Europe, at the nation that you somehow don't generally hear about, these large protests or smashing up shops. You don't hear that coming out of Germany like you do in Greece or other nations. Now, that's not to say something like that couldn't happen. It might. But you clearly now are seeing a huge difference between these nations, like France now, that just want everything handed to them on a platter, and the only nation that's standing firm is Germany with these austerity measures, that if we're going in debt, we've got to cut back cost. Seems like a common sense type of thing. But the people don't want that, because the people watch the news and see that, well, if the big banks are getting bailed out, if the big automotive companies are getting bailed out, then why can't we as individuals be bailed out? Why aren't there bailouts for everyone? And, well, they have a point. But as Mr. Morley has written also at the Trumpet.com, the bailouts can't just continue. I just received a book recently on the debt bomb and haven't had a chance to go through it yet. But these books, it seems like, books like that are just coming out right and left now. It has to do more with the economy here in America. But the same can be said for so many of those nations right around Germany. And it's catapulted Germany to the forefront, just as Mr. Armstrong, many years ago, predicted would happen. And he made that prediction, as we well know, based upon the sure word of Bible prophecy. This is from Mr. Fraser's column, Ron Fraser's column on May 7th, just a few days ago. He says, since the European community's inception, joint Franco-German leadership has been taken as a given. France wanted to keep a close eye on Germany to ensure that nation would never repeat its incursions across France's borders, such as had occurred in 1871, 1914, and 1939, World War II, of course. He writes, the post-war French view was that Germany was slated to take on the role of the economic engine of Europe while being marginalized from direct political influence. That was the idea way back when. Well, let's keep Germany doing what it's good at, running the economy, and let's leave others to take care of the political power so that Germany doesn't get out of hand again, as they've been wont to do historically. Says France was to take the lead European political role. It seemed an ideal arrangement to the Western allies. Now, what he goes on and talks about in his column is the three great disruptions that have happened over the last 2 decades that have split apart this alliance between France and Germany. The most recent one, of course, being Nicolas Sarkozy's failed re-election bid. That's brought in this socialist leader, the first time France has had a socialist president in something like 30 years. Why? Well, because the people want to receive the free handouts. They don't want austerity measures. They want the party to continue. They want the dollars or whatever it is over there in Europe to continue to be printed. Mr. Fraser says, gone is the linchpin partnership that held the EU together since the Treaty of Rome established the European community in 1957. Gone is this linchpin partnership, France and Germany. And as he writes in his column, Germany's now looking elsewhere. Where do you suppose? The German chancellor has quickly moved to align herself with Rome through her overtures to Italy's Prime Minister Monti as a replacement for her old EU political partner, Nicolas Sarkozy. It says, in place of the Franco-German alliance, as of this moment, notice this, as of this moment is a new partnership. In reality, it is none other than the resurrection of the old Berlin-Rome axis of 1939. And so you see Germany now looking elsewhere. There's nothing but strain between Germany and nations like France and Greece and others that are about to default on these huge debts, these loans that they're living on. And here we see this old axis from World War II re-emerging, just as Mr. Armstrong said it would. This is a few of the quotes that Mr. Fraser collected for his column from May 7th. Mr. Armstrong wrote in 1954, "Nothing can prevent Germany from completely dominating Europe. Soon there will be the prophesied united Europe, the resurrected Roman Empire, with Germans in complete domination. It's prophesied. It's prophesied," he said. It's coming. That was in 1954. And now the Daily Express is beginning to come around to it here in 2012. 1954, imagine that. In 1957, Mr. Armstrong said, "No one else is telling what prophecy says Germany and fascism in Europe are starting undercover." It says, "You'll soon see it. The United States of Europe, the resurrected Roman Empire." See, no one else was talking about it except Mr. Armstrong back in the 50s, even before that, then in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And we've continued right on in that same prophetic tradition. Let's look at Jeremiah 25. But people, for the most part, have ignored those prophecies. They've ignored those warnings. They've turned a blind eye to what's happening. Mr. Armstrong, as Isaiah 40 brings out, was like a voice crying in the wilderness. And even today, even now, you have a few like the Daily Express and GermanForeignPolicy.com, but it's amazing. You hear the pundits over here in America. Now that Sarkozy's been shown the door, oh, well, what does this mean? Maybe this is the time that incumbents can be voted out. Maybe that means President Obama can be voted out, they say, without realizing the true significance of what's happening. I mean, Germany may appear to be backed into a corner for a time, but look, in Germany there is strength. There is strength, economically, politically, and so on. And that's what the pundits should be talking about. How this is shaking up Europe. How this is preparing for the downsizing to those 10 prophesied nations. How that old 1939 axis is re-emerging between a German strongman leading that political union and, of course, the head of that great church in Rome. All of it, you see, prophesied in your Bible. Mr. Armstrong said, this is from 1980, a few years before he died, he said, "We have reached the time just before the United States of Europe restores the Holy Roman Empire under the papacy in a union of church and state." It says, once that third great power is formed, our work will soon be over. That's from 1980. And this is how close we're getting, students, to the end of this age of man and the beginning of a new age, of a new civilization to be set up and established by Jesus Christ, the coming King of Kings and Lord of Lords. When that Holy Roman Empire comes front and center, this work, God's work, will be about over, as he said there in that quote. This is how close we're getting. Jeremiah 25 here in verse 3, it says, "From the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even unto this day, that is the 23rd year, the word of the Lord has come unto me, and I have spoken unto you, rising early and speaking, but you have not hearkened." Jeremiah goes back and says, look, for this 23-year period, God has just kept giving me this warning message to give to you, the people of Judah. And I've been doing it. I've been rising early to get on with the work. I've been diligent in this commission. I've been urgent as God is urgent. But you have not hearkened. You have not listened. They didn't listen, and they went into captivity. I was just reading from Jeremiah the other day about the remnant that was spared that went into the Babylonian captivity. They were spared, and there was, I forget the names of all the principal players, but Jeremiah and the king's daughters were in there with them, and then they came to this dispute about, well, should we go down to Egypt or not? And they went to Jeremiah and said, well, what does God say? And God said, don't go to Egypt. Don't go down there. If you go down to Egypt because you're afraid of the Babylonians, you're going to get overrun down in Egypt. And you know what they said to Jeremiah? They said, that's not God's message. If we don't go to Egypt, we're going to be destroyed. And the thing of it was, they were destroyed just a few months, maybe years previous to that, except for that little remnant that had been spared. How quickly they forgot what happened, their own history, and how quickly they abandoned the prophet of God that told them and told them and told them and told them. He rose up early. That was his custom. That's the way Jesus was. In the Gospels it says he got up a great while before the day to get in his time with God. Prayer and Bible study, all the things that we've had many other forums about. And you've got to do the same thing. So do I. I mean, we have to be prepared for what's coming. Mr. Armstrong said, once that power is formed, our work will soon be over. And so we've got to be ready. And we've got to be rising early to draw close to God and to know the significance of these events swirling all around. Jeremiah says, from the 13th year all the way to this year, I've spoken to you, rising early, speaking, but you have not hearkened. Look at verse 4, it says, and the Lord has sent unto you all his servants, the prophets, rising early and sending them. But you have not hearkened, nor inclined your ear to hear. See, the key to our success, spiritually speaking, the key to our success is being urgent the way God is urgent, knowing the times that we're living in, knowing the seriousness of these prophecies, these days. 2 Chronicles 36. 2 Chronicles 36. It's no wonder Jeremiah spent a lot of time weeping, as it says in his book, and even in the Psalms. He saw the people of God just continually ignore his warnings, even as the Babylonians were barreling down upon them. Even after that happened, and that little remnant just rejected the prophecies of God, the warnings from Jeremiah. This is a quote from the Jeremiah booklet that my father's written. God was always urgent and hard-working in sending prophets to warn Judah. Jeremiah was being inspired by God. He says, here is the key to our success in God's work. We must be urgent the way God is. There's nothing more urgent than getting God's work done. Once that power forms, as Mr. Armstrong said, then our work will be about over. Notice this, 2 Chronicles 36 and verse 14. It says, moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. Verse 15 says, and the Lord God of their fathers, sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes, it says, and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. God kept sending these messengers because of his compassion, because of his mercy. He kept sending these messengers, rising up betimes. A little awkward, King James language. But the meaning there, if you look at the Hebrew phrase, it means to load up, like on the back of a man or a beast, to pile it on top of that oxen, to start early in the morning, carrying that load, carrying on in the journey ahead to finish the work. Rising up early, see, getting on with God's work, making that your first objective. Here God reminds us that these prophets, these messengers came to the people of Judah and Israel before them, and spoke with urgency and came at them often. They weren't discouraged, and neither can we be. I mean, it's gone on for decades and decades. And this whole auditorium should be filled with people who've supported this work. As it is, there's just a handful of you. But God's servants have to continue on, rising up betimes. I mean, that phrase there, even though it's old English and awkward, it conveys just how concerned God is about the affairs of this world and how much compassion he has on the people of this world to keep sending this message out. This is a quote from Matthew Henry's commentary. He says, "Let this quicken us to seek God early, that he rises betimes to send us." It says, "The prophets that were sent rose betimes to speak to them, were diligent and faithful in their office, lost no time, slipped no opportunity of dealing with them, and therefore God is said to rise betimes." It says, "The more pains ministers take in their work, the more will the people have to answer for, if it be all in vain." So Jeremiah and others like him. It's not to say he and Baruch didn't suffer from discouragement at times. How could they not? I mean, they were facing such an obstinate and stubborn people. But look, this says a lot about the purpose for this work. But this history and some of these prophecies, these news events that we've discussed, also serve as a reminder for us as God's students of the Bible, that we've got to rise early each day and be urgent for God through the day in and day out. There's a verse in Ephesians 6 that says, "Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints." See, praying always, watching world events, keeping our nose in the Bible, so that we can know, so that we can be ready, so that we'll be prepared for when that changeover takes place and God's government and God's family can be established on earth.